The almost unvarying success of the raiders in their forays gave the general impression that they were invincible. That is, that not enough men could be concentrated against them to whip them. Our ill success in the attack we made on them in April helped us to the same belief. If we could not beat them then, we could not now, after we had been enfeebled by months of starvation and disease.
Why not wade into them and start breaking their heads off? That's what we should be talking about.
Keep your voice down. You can't just wade into them. There's too many of them.
Look at every man here. Should have done it 2 months ago. Just that everyone thought we was going to be exchanged. Sure we will. Any year now. Did it when we should have. My brother'd still be alive.
You know, maybe we ought to take them on, huh?
Come on, what are we feared of? We're not a bunch of little girls, you know.
You can't keep a secret in a place like this. You go try and get together 1,000 men to take them on, because that's what it'll take. And they'll get you first. They will.
They all had good tents constructed of stolen blankets, and their headquarters was a large roomy tent with a circular top situated on the street leading to the south gate and capable of accommodating from 75 to 100 men. All the material for this had been wrested away from others. While hundreds were dying of scurvy and diarrhea from the miserable insufficient food and lack of vegetables, these fellows had flour, fresh meat, onions, potatoes, green beans, and other things, the very looks of which were a torture to hungry, scorbutic, dysenteric men. They were on the best possible terms with the rebels, whom they fawned upon and groveled before, and were in return allowed many favors, in the way of trading, going out upon detail, and making purchases. Among their special objects of attack were the small traders in the prison. We had quite a number of these whose genius for barter was so strong that it took root and flourished even in that unpropitious soil. And during the time when new prisoners were constantly coming in with money, they managed to accumulate small sums, from $10 upward, by trading between the guards and the prisoners. In the period immediately following a prisoner's entrance, he was likely to spend all his money and trade off all his possessions for food, trusting to fortune to get him out of there when these were gone. Then was when he was profitable to these go-betweens, who managed to make him pay handsomely for what he had got. The raiders kept watch of these traders and plundered them whenever occasion served. It reminded one of the habits of the fishing eagle, which hovers around until some other bird catches a fish, and then takes it away. Among ourselves, there was no one in position to lay down law and enforce it. Being all enlisted men, we were on a dead level as far as rank was concerned, the highest being only sergeants, whose stripes carried no weight of authority. The time of our stay was, it was hoped, too transient to make it worthwhile bothering about organizing any form of government. The great bulk of the boys were recent comers, who hoped that in another week or so they would be out again. There was no fat salaries to tempt anyone to take upon himself the duty of ruling the masses, and all were left to their own devices to do good or evil according to their several bents, and as fear of consequences swayed them. Each little squad of men was a law unto ourselves, and made and enforced their own regulations on their own territory. The administration of justice was reduced to its simplest terms. If a fellow did wrong, he was pounded, if there was anybody capable of doing it. If not, he went free.
Raiders acting fearful. Was boiling my cup of meal today, and one of the raiders ran against it, and over it went. Give him a whack side of the head that made him see stars, I should judge, and in return he made me see the whole heavens. Saw a newcomer pounded to a jelly by the raiders. His cries for relief were awful, but none came. Must a few villains live at the expense of so many? God help us from these worse than rebels. Raiders now do just as they please, kill, plunder, and steal in broad daylight, with no one to molest them. Have been trying to organize a police force, but cannot do it. Raiders are the stronger party. Man killed by the raiders near where we slept. Head all pounded to pieces with a club. Murders an everyday occurrence.
By the middle of June, the continual success of the raiders emboldened them so that they no longer confined their depredations to the night, but made their forays in broad daylight. And there was hardly an hour in the 24-hour that the cry of "Raiders, Raiders!" did not go up from some part of the pen, and on looking in the direction of the cry, one would see a surging commotion, men struggling, and clubs being plied vigorously. This was even more common than the guards shooting men at the creek crossing. One day I saw Dick Allen's raiders, 11 in number, attack a man wearing the uniform of Ellet's Marine Brigade. He was a recent comer and alone, but he was brave. He had come into possession of a spade by some means or another, and he used this with delightful vigor and effect. 2 or 3 times he struck one of his assailants so fairly on the head and with such goodwill that I congratulated myself that he had killed him. Finally, Dick Allen managed to slip around behind him unnoticed, and striking him on the head with a slung shot, knocked him down, when the whole crowd pounced upon him to kill him, but were driven off by others rallying to his assistance. But the main thing was to get away from the stockade. This, as the French say of all first steps, was what would cost. Our first attempt was made about a week after our arrival. We found 2 logs on the east side that were a couple of feet shorter than the rest, and it seemed as if they could be successfully scaled. About 50 of us resolved to make the attempt. We made a rope 25 or 30 feet long and strong enough to bear a man out of strings and strips of cloth. A stout stick was fastened to the end so that it would catch on the logs on either side of the gap. On a night dark enough to favor our scheme, we gathered together, drew cuts to determine each boy's place in line, fell in single rank, according to this arrangement, and marched to the place. The line was thrown skillfully, the stick caught fairly in the notch, and the boy who had drawn number 1 climbed up amid a suspense so keen that I could hear my heart beating. It seemed ages before he reached the top, and that the noise he made must certainly attract the attention of the guard. It did not. We saw our comrade's figure outlined against the sky as he slid over the top, and then heard the dull thump as he sprang to the ground on the other side. "Number 2," was whispered by our leader, and he performed the feat as successfully as his predecessor. "Number 3," and he followed noiselessly and quickly. Thus it went on until just as we heard number 15 drop, we also heard a rebel voice say in a vicious undertone, "Halt! Halt there! Damn you!" This was enough. The game was up, we were discovered, and the remaining 35 of us left that locality with all the speed on our heels, getting away just in time to escape a volley which a squad of guards posted in the lookouts poured upon the spot where we had been standing. The next morning, the 15 who had got over the stockade were brought in, each chained to a 64-pound ball. Their story was that one of the New Yorkers, who had become cognizant of our scheme, had sought to obtain favor in the rebel eyes by betraying us. The rebels stationed a squad at the crossing place, and as each man dropped down from the stockade, he was caught by the shoulder, the muzzle of a revolver thrust into his face, and an order to surrender whispered into his ear. It was expected that the guards on the sentry boxes would do such execution among those of us still inside as would prove a warning to other would-be escapes. They were defeated in this benevolent intention by the readiness with which we divined the meaning of that incautiously loud halt, and our clarity in leaving the unhealthy locality. The traitorous New Yorker was rewarded with a detail into the commissary department, where he fed and fattened like a rat that had secured undisturbed homestead rights in the center of a cheese. When the miserable remnant of us were leaving Andersonville months afterward, I saw him, sleek, rotund, and well-clothed, lounging leisurely in the door of a tent. He regarded us a moment contemptuously, and then went on conversing with a fellow New Yorker in the foul slang that none but such as he were low enough to use.
New prisoners coming in every day with good clothes, blankets, and so on, and occasionally with considerable money. These are victims for the raiders who pitch into them for plunder. Very serious fights occur. Occasionally a party of newcomers sticks together and whip the raiders, who afterward rally their forces, and the affair ends with the robbers victorious. Stones, clubs, knives, slingshots, and so on, are used on these occasions, and sometimes the camp gets so stirred up that the rebels, thinking a break is intended, fire into the crowds gathered, and many are killed before quiet is again restored. Raiders kill someone now every day. No restraint in the least. Men who were no doubt respectable at home are now the worst villains in the world. One of them was sneaking about our quarters during the night, and Sanders knocked him about 10 feet with a board. Some one of us must keep awake all the time and on the watch. Batese has called his Indian friends all together, and probably 100 of us are banded together for self-protection. The animal predominates. All restraint is thrown off, and the very old Harry is to pay. Strong talk of forming a police force to put down raiders and to enforce order. If successful, it will prove of great benefit. Sanders, Rowe, Blakeman, Dakin, and myself are among those who will take an active part,